They said a housewife could never stand against a man who built his life on charm and ambition. They said a woman who stayed home, who cooked dinners and packed lunches would always be left behind once her husband outgrew her. But on the night of my 38th birthday, when my husband raised his glass and announced to everyone that I wasn't fit for him anymore, something happened that none of them expected. What was meant to humiliate me became the very stage where he unraveled and where I began again. A birthday toast turned into a declaration of war, and an envelope turned into the sharpest weapon of all. What would you have done if your partner dismissed you in front of your own child, in front of family and friends, on the day meant to celebrate your life? Would you stay silent? Would you fight back? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your voice. And if this story pulls you in, remember to like, share, and subscribe, because what happens next is something no one at that table could forget. The candles flickered low as the waiter carried out the cake, a chorus of voices singing over the city lights. My daughter Emily leaned into me, her arms warm around my shoulders, her laughter the sweetest gift I could have asked for. For a moment, I thought nothing could pierce the joy. But then Richard, my husband, stood tall at the head of the table, glass raised high. His voice cut across the room. "To new beginnings, without Laura. A housewife doesn't fit a man like me." The air froze. Emily's smile vanished, her fork clattering against the plate. Guests shifted uncomfortably, whispers swelling like a tide. I looked at him, at the man who once swore he loved every version of me, and saw only arrogance shining in his eyes. I didn't scream, I didn't beg. Instead, I reached into my bag and drew out a black envelope, its edges sharp beneath my fingers. Slowly, deliberately, I slid it across the white linen tablecloth until it rested by his plate. He glanced down, confusion flickering before the smirk returned. Around us, the city hummed through the glass windows, but at that table, silence pressed heavy, waiting to see who I really was. I smiled faintly, not for him, but for myself, and for the daughter watching every breath I took. When we returned home that night, the house felt heavier than ever before, as if the walls themselves had overheard his toast. I switched on the kitchen light, the glow falling across the dining table still set from earlier. Richard stormed in moments later, the sound of the door slamming echoing through every room. His voice came like thunder, dripping with anger and disdain. "What the hell was that, Laura? You embarrassed me in front of everyone by walking out like some martyr." I didn't flinch. I stood by the counter, the black envelope now resting between my hands. My voice stayed calm. "You embarrassed yourself, Richard. I didn't have to say a word." He paced the floor, hands flying through the air, his face flushed with fury. "You think you can play this game with me? I make the money. I decide how this ends." Slowly, I set the envelope down and reached into the drawer beside me. When I turned back, a folded document lay open on the table, the familiar pages of our prenuptial agreement staring back at him. He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing, his jaw tightening. "You wouldn't dare use that against me." I slid the paper closer to his side of the table, the lines highlighting the fidelity clause already marked. His eyes darted over the words, and then I placed a small flash drive beside it. "Everything you promised her. Every dollar you tried to shift out of our accounts, every lie. It's all here." His color drained as if the blood was being pulled from his face. He snatched up the document, flipping through the pages as though the words might rearrange themselves if he glared hard enough. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I simply let the silence carve into him until he couldn't bear it. When he finally spoke, his tone cracked, a fragile edge breaking through the arrogance. "You've been spying on me." I lifted my chin, my eyes fixed on his. "No, Richard. I've been protecting myself. While you thought I was only cooking dinners and folding laundry, I was building something you never even tried to understand. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked smaller, deflated, like the man who had strutted at my birthday dinner no longer existed. I stepped closer, my hand steady as I tapped the claws with one finger. You thought tonight was your victory, but you were already standing on the edge of your own collapse. The clock on the wall ticked loud in the silence, each second marking the beginning of the end. He lowered the paper slowly, the fight slipping out of him, replaced by a look I had not seen in years. Fear. And in that moment, I knew the power he thought I never had was finally mine to hold. The next morning, the house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of untouched coffee, the prenup still lying there, pages slightly curled at the corners. My hands were steady, though my heart felt like it had been running all night. The door creaked open and Emily stepped inside, her backpack still slung over one shoulder. Her eyes were red from crying, and when she saw me, she froze, as if she wasn't sure whether to run to me or collapse where she stood. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why did he do that to you? Why did he say those things in front of everyone?" She dropped her bag onto the floor with a thud and came toward me, her arms wrapping tightly around my shoulders. I felt the weight of her fear press against me, the urgency of a daughter desperate to protect what she loved most. I stroked her hair gently, letting her sob into my chest, the tears soaking through my blouse. "I'm here," I murmured, pressing my lips against her forehead. "We'll be okay. Trust me." She pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes, her face streaked with tears but fierce with something more. "He humiliated you on your birthday, Mom, and he looked at you like you were nothing." Her voice cracked, anger and pain clashing in every word. "I hate him for that." I held her face in my hands, forcing her to meet my gaze. "Don't carry hate, Emily. He chose his path, but we will choose ours." For a moment, she searched my eyes, as though testing the strength behind my calm. Then she nodded slowly, determination beginning to harden her expression. The front door slammed somewhere in the house, and we both jumped. Richard's footsteps echoed down the hall, heavy, deliberate. Emily stiffened, her hands curling into fists at her sides. He entered the kitchen, his eyes bloodshot, his tie crooked, his pride still simmering beneath the surface. "So this is how it is now," he sneered, his voice sharp. "You poison our daughter against me?" Emily stepped forward before I could speak, her voice rising with a power I had never heard from her before. "You don't need Mom to poison me. I saw what you did. I heard what you said. You don't get to call her nothing when she's everything to me." Richard's face reddened, his jaw clenching as he stared at her. But Emily didn't flinch. She stood tall, her shoulders squared like a shield. I reached for her hand, squeezing it, grounding her strength with mine. "Go to your room," I whispered gently, though my eyes never left Richard's. Emily hesitated, then bent down to kiss my cheek. Her whisper lingered against my skin. "Don't let him win." She left her bag on the floor as she disappeared down the hall, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. Richard's eyes locked on mine, but for the first time I saw something falter there. Not power, not anger, something that looked almost like doubt. And in that moment, I knew the war he started at my birthday table had only just begun. 2 nights later, the sound of a car door echoed in the driveway, long after dark. I stood by the window, the street lamp casting a pale glow over the hood of Richard's sedan. Another door opened and closed, lighter, sharper. He hadn't come alone. My stomach tightened as the front door rattled and then swung wide open. Richard marched in, his suit jacket half unbuttoned, his expression carved from stone. Behind him trailed Sophie, her heels clicking across the hardwood like tiny hammers driving nails into the floor. He didn't waste time with greetings. Enough of your little games, Laura, he snapped, his eyes burning holes through me. You think you can humiliate me with paperwork and threats? Sophie deserves better than this charade, and so do I. Sophie shifted beside him, her arms crossed, eyes darting nervously around the room as though she wasn't entirely sure what she had walked into. I let the silence settle between us, then reached for the small speaker already set on the counter. With one touch, the recording came alive, Richard's own voice filling the kitchen. His laughter, slick and confident, promising Sophie he would take care of her, that the money was already moving from joint accounts into his private stash. His words dripped through the speakers like poison, every detail spilling into the open. Sophie's face drained of color, her eyes widened as she turned sharply toward him. You told me this was clean. You told me it was yours. Richard's smirk faltered, the arrogance slipping away as quickly as it had come. Sophie, wait, you don't understand. But her voice cut through him like glass. No, I understand perfectly. You're a liar, you used me, and you used her. The sound of her hand meeting his cheek cracked across the room, sharp as thunder. He staggered back, stunned, one hand clutching his face. Sophie didn't wait for him to recover. She grabbed her purse, her heels clattering like gunshots as she stormed toward the door. The slam that followed shook the frame of the house. For a moment, the room was still. Richard stood there, chest heaving, the imprint of her hand already burning red across his skin. I leaned against the counter, my arms folded, my voice steady and low. Everything you built on lies will fall apart the same way, Richard. Fast, brutal, and in front of everyone you tried to impress. He spun toward me, rage sparking in his eyes, but there was no one left to defend him, no adoring face at his side to fuel his pride, only the echo of his own betrayal filling the space where Sophie had stood. And in that silence, I saw it, the first crock in the fortress of his ego, the moment he realized the life he thought he owned was no longer his to control. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, but there was no warmth in it. Richard had already left the house, his footsteps pounding out the door before dawn like a man running from his own shadow. I sat at the table, a folder of documents spread before me, the hum of the refrigerator my only companion. My lawyer had promised everything was in motion. All I had to do was wait. By mid-morning, Richard's world began to unravel. He walked into a luxury dealership downtown, his eyes gleaming as he laid a hand across the hood of a brand new car, the kind he thought announced his importance to the world. He handed over his card with that same careless smirk he wore at my birthday dinner, but the machine beeped, and the salesman's polite smile stiffened. "I'm sorry, sir, it's been declined." Richard tried again, louder this time, demanding they run it once more. Another beep, another shake of the head. Around him, the showroom gleamed with polished chrome and glass, but the walls seemed to close in on him. He fumbled for another card, but one by one, they all failed. His voice cracked into desperation, his tone sharper, angrier, until the manager approached, calm but firm, asking him to step aside. At that very moment, my phone buzzed. A message from my attorney lit up the screen. All accounts successfully frozen, court approved. I closed my eyes and exhaled, the weight of weeks pressing out of me. The war Richard thought he was winning was already over. He just didn't know it yet. Later that afternoon, I met my lawyer in her downtown office, the windows looking out across the gray river winding through the city. She slid the final papers across the desk, her pen tapping against the margin where I needed to sign. My hand didn't tremble. I pressed my name into the page, every stroke of the ink sealing another door Richard could never reopen. Meanwhile, across town, Richard's phone lit up with alerts. Investments frozen, transfers denied. His reflection in the glass of a high-rise lobby looked less like the man he imagined and more like a stranger cornered. He sank onto a bench, his tie hanging loose, his hands shaking as he scrolled through messages that offered no relief. When I left the office, the city air felt sharper, cleaner. The heels of my shoes clicked across the pavement with a rhythm I hadn't heard in years, steady and sure. Emily called while I walked, her voice soft but strong. "Mom, whatever happens, I'm with you." I swallowed hard, the sting of tears rising in my eyes. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't just surviving, I was moving. And Richard, wherever he sat in that moment, was finally learning what it meant to lose everything he thought he owned. By the end of that week, the whispers had already begun. Neighbors glanced too long when I stepped outside to collect the mail, their conversations pausing mid-sentence. Richard's name, once spoken with admiration, now slipped through their mouths with pity or disdain. The empire he paraded had cracked in full view, and the cracks spread quickly. Emily came home from school one afternoon, her cheeks flushed with anger. She dropped her books on the table and glared at me. "He showed up, Mom. He tried to talk to me like nothing happened. In front of my friends." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from fury. I reached for her hand, but she pulled away, pacing the floor. "He doesn't get it. He thinks he can still play Father of the Year after what he did to you." Before I could answer, the rumble of an engine filled the driveway. Richard's car. Emily stiffened, her jaw tightening as the front door swung open. He entered without knocking, his tie loosened, his smile forced. "Emily, sweetheart, let's not fight. I just want to talk." She stood in the middle of the living room, her arms folded, her voice sharp. "Talk about what, Dad? How you trashed Mom on her birthday, how you moved money like we wouldn't notice, how you treat her like she's less than you." The words cut through the room, each one louder than the last. Richard's smile faltered, his eyes darting toward me as if I could save him. I didn't move. Emily's voice rose again, fierce and clear. "You told me to study hard, to be honest, to never lie. And then you lied to both of us. You lied every single day." Her fists clenched at her sides, her whole body shaking, but she didn't back down. Richard tried to step forward, reaching out as though to calm her. She stepped back sharply, her chin lifting. Don't touch me. You don't get to pretend anymore." The neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, shadows passing by the window, and Emily's words carried into the night like a verdict delivered to the world outside. The silence that followed pressed heavy. Richard's shoulders slumped, his confidence bleeding away. He looked smaller, cornered, his voice breaking. "Emily, I'm still your father." Her reply was cold, steady. "Then start acting like it. Until then, don't come near me." She turned, walked down the hall, and shut her bedroom door with a finality that echoed through every wall. I stood there, my heart split between pain and pride. I hadn't asked her to fight for me, yet she had, with every ounce of strength inside her. Richard lingered for a moment longer, but the weight of what he'd lost hung too heavy. Without another word, he walked back out the door, the sound of it closing behind him, more final than anything I could have said. A few days later, Emily knocked on my bedroom door, her face serious but bright with something I hadn't seen in weeks. "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet," she said. Her tone left no room for hesitation. I followed her out to the car, the autumn air crisp against my skin, leaves scattering across the driveway. She drove us across town to the campus where she spent her afternoons, a place filled with tall glass buildings and students rushing between classes. Inside one of the labs, the smell of coffee and old books lingered. A man stood at a cluttered desk, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly disheveled, glasses slipping down the bridge of his nose as he scribbled equations across a whiteboard. Emily's voice carried softly through the room. "Dr. Brooks, this is my mom." He turned, his expression warm, eyes sharp with intelligence, but gentle in a way that caught me off guard. I extended my hand, but he was already smiling, already moving toward me with a kind of quiet energy. "Emily's told me about you," he said, his voice calm yet commanding. "But I can see she left out the part about where she gets her strength." I felt the corners of my mouth lift, the first real smile I had allowed myself since my birthday night. We sat at a table cluttered with books and tangled wires, the hum of computers filling the silence between us. He asked about my work, and Emily glanced at me expectantly. I hesitated, then leaned closer, taking his laptop in my hands. The screen glowed with data streams, firewall patterns riddled with flaws. My fingers moved across the keys as naturally as breathing, tracing the breach in seconds, rewriting code that had stumped his graduate team for days. When I finished, I looked up to find him watching me, his brow raised, a glimmer of awe in his eyes. "That was remarkable. You're not just supporting from home, you're leading from a place no one sees." Emily leaned in, her voice proud and certain. "I told you, Mom. You're not what he said you were. You're more." My throat tightened, my hand trembling slightly as I closed the laptop. For years, I had hidden this part of myself behind the curtain of domestic life, letting Richard believe his own lies. And here, in the presence of my daughter and her mentor, the truth breathed again. Dr. Brooks offered me coffee, his smile steady. "We could use someone like you," he said, simply, as if the words were obvious. Emily beamed, her eyes shining as she squeezed my hand under the table. In that quiet lab, surrounded by chalk dust and humming machines, I felt something shift. Not revenge, not survival, possibility. For the first time in years, the future no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like a door waiting to be opened. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and cold stone, the kind of air that swallowed sound and held its breath. I walked in with my lawyer at my side, my heels striking the floor with a rhythm that matched the pounding of my heart. Emily sat in the gallery, her eyes fixed on me, her presence a silent anchor. At the opposite table, Richard straightened his tie, though the dark circles under his eyes betrayed sleepless nights. He forced a smile when he saw me, but it collapsed as quickly as it appeared. The judge entered, robes sweeping, and the room rose. We sat, the silence slicing through every corner. Richard's lawyer stood first, his voice loud and theatrical. He painted Richard as a man unfairly punished, a husband who had given everything, a father who only wanted his share. "Half the assets," he demanded. "That is what justice requires." Richard leaned back, his chin raised, his smirk creeping across his face as though victory was already his. Then it was our turn. My lawyer rose, calm but sharp, and slid a folder across the bench. "Your Honor, within these pages are bank records showing secret transfers. Here are messages detailing promises to a mistress, promises made with marital funds. And here," she paused, clicking a remote, "is the audio recording." Richard's own voice filled the courtroom, smooth and confident, promising Sophie he would take care of her with money he never earned alone. His smirk died mid-sentence, his hand tightening around the edge of the table. The judge leaned forward, glasses perched at the tip of his nose. "Mr. Carter, do you dispute these are your words?" Richard stammered, his mouth opening and closing, but nothing coherent came out. A murmur rippled through the gallery, the weight of his lies finally exposed to more than just me. My lawyer continued, her tone steady. "The prenup is clear. Fidelity was a condition. He broke that condition knowingly and repeatedly. Therefore, my client requests enforcement as written. The home, majority of the assets, and custody." She sat down, the sound of her chair echoing like a gavel. The judge reviewed the documents, the silence stretching long enough to make Richard shift in his seat. Finally, his voice cut through. "This court upholds the prenuptial agreement. Mrs. Carter will retain the marital home. Primary custody of the child is granted to her. The frozen accounts will be released to her control. Mr. Carter's claims are denied." Emily gasped softly, covering her mouth with her hands. Richard slumped forward, his head bowing, the arrogance drained out of him. I closed my eyes, breathing in the moment, not with triumph, but with relief. The battle he began on my birthday had reached its turning point, and in that courtroom, surrounded by strangers, he was forced to face the truth he had tried so hard to bury. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with voices, heels striking tile, papers rustling like dry leaves. I walked out slowly, Emily clutching my hand, her face lit with a kind of fragile relief. My lawyer spoke quietly with a clerk, but I barely heard. The sound that filled my ears was the steady beat of my own breath, sharp and certain, as though the air itself was new again. Then I heard him. "Laura." His voice, low and rough, stopped me cold. I turned to see Richard standing near the benches, his shoulders slumped, his tie loose, the arrogance stripped away. For the first time in years, he looked smaller than the man he had pretended to be. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen since we were young: hesitation. He stepped closer, careful, like a man approaching a door that might slam in his face. "I made mistakes," he whispered, his hands trembling as he reached out, not quite touching me. "I lost myself. I lost us. I don't know what I was thinking." His words broke apart, each one weaker than the last. Is there any way we can fix this?" Emily stiffened beside me, her grip on my hand tightening like steel. She didn't speak, but I felt her breath quicken, the anger she carried burning just beneath her skin. I lifted my chin, my eyes fixed on the man who once thought I was nothing. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, filled with all the nights of betrayal, all the lies, all the broken promises. "No, Richard." My voice was soft, but it cut clean. "You chose this. Every time you lied, every time you looked at me like I was less, you ended this long before today." His face faltered, his mouth opening as if to argue, but no sound came. The truth pressed too heavy. I took Emily's hand and turned away, but not before I saw it, the flicker of regret, the collapse of a man who realized too late what he had lost. His voice followed me, barely more than a whisper. "I'm sorry." But the words fell into the hallway like dust, too thin to change the weight of what had been done. Emily looked up at me as we stepped into the sunlight outside. "Mom, don't ever let him back in." Her eyes burned with a fire that reminded me of my own. I squeezed her hand, my voice steady. "I won't." Behind us, the courthouse doors closed with a heavy thud, shutting Richard inside with his regrets. Ahead of us stretched the street, busy and alive, a reminder that the world keeps moving even when someone else's pride tries to hold you down. And in that moment, with my daughter at my side, I knew the only direction left was forward.
6 months later, the city looked different to me. The skyline was the same, the river still winding beneath the bridges, but the air carried a lightness I had not felt in years. That morning, I stood in front of a glass building downtown, sunlight spilling across the letters newly mounted above the entrance. Brooks & Carter Cybersecurity Consulting. My name, once hidden in the shadow of his, now gleamed in steel for anyone to see. Inside the office, the smell of fresh paint mingled with the warmth of coffee. Desks lined with monitors glowed with streams of data, the quiet hum of servers steady like a heartbeat. A small team of young women moved about the space, voices low but determined, their laughter rising every so often as they settled into the work we had built together. Emily leaned against the doorway, watching me with that same spark in her eyes that had carried me through every storm. "Look at you, Mom," she said, her smile breaking wide. "You didn't just survive, you built something real." Her pride filled the room stronger than any light. I walked over and pulled her into my arms, holding her close. "We built this," I whispered, my throat tightening. Because you believed in me when no one else did. A knock on the open door drew my attention. Dr. Brooks stood there, a folder in his hands, his tie loosened as always, his expression calm but filled with respect. "First client meeting is in an hour," he said gently, then added with a smile, "They're eager to work with you, Laura." The way he said my name held no trace of dismissal, only acknowledgement. I looked back at Emily, and for a fleeting moment, the memory of Richard's voice on my birthday flickered in my mind, calling me unfit, nothing more than a housewife. The words no longer cut, they no longer held power. Instead, I thought of every night I had coded in silence, every document I had prepared, every choice to stay steady while the world tried to shatter me. I stepped into the conference room where the table was set, contracts ready, the city skyline stretching beyond the glass. My reflection in that window was not the woman who had been humiliated on her birthday. She was gone. What stared back was someone stronger, steadier, and unafraid. Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, clear and certain. "He said you were nothing, Mom. But look at you now." I turned, smiling softly. "I was never nothing. I just had to stop letting someone else decide my worth." The office buzzed to life behind me, a chorus of keys clicking, phones ringing, voices steady with purpose. I knew the road ahead would not be easy, but it was mine. And as I stood there with my daughter by my side and the future opening wide, I understood the truth completely. No one can define you unless you let them.